All right. Anybody crazy enough to be watching? I'm watching some stuff from Kohle Audio Cult. This guy Christian Kohle. I think he's like a metal engineer in Europe someplace or whatever. He has a lot of really cool videos. I think he did a video on our stuff. I can't 1000% remember, but he's got a couple that I'm really interested in, and I think I have a different opinion than him, but that's okay. We're different. People are different. We're allowed to have different opinions, right? This one is called Which DI Box for Your Guitar or Bass? All the info you need. There was some kind of like clickbaity looking thumbnail. I can't really remember what it was, but it's like they all sound different or something. I'm not sure that that's really true or if that's exactly what he said. So I want to really watch what he's showing. So just for reference, we bring this up a lot. This was where I actually tested many of the big DI boxes out there, and honestly, two of the best ones were the Radial, no surprise, right? Radial JDI. But there's this really cheap one from Whirlwind or Rapco or whatever. It's like $20 or $40 at the time. I'm not sure what's replaced it since then, but honestly, if you're just talking about sound quality, I think that the results are in. If you want something that's neutral, there's a bunch that can do it, from very expensive to very cheap. The Radial stuff possibly rejects interference type noise better, but it didn't really have a better noise profile than the super cheapies. The Radial stuff is built like a tank, which could be very important for your live use or studio if stuff gets kicked around. Though the really cheap one that performed well, what was it even called? Let me see. Man. Some of the most expensive ones didn't perform all that well, honestly, but not so much that it would make any difference. Rapco DB100, that was it. It was less than $50. I think, yeah, actually might have been lower noise than the Radial. So you always hear this thing, you get what you pay for, and that's just not true. I mean, if it's a brand new car for $1, yeah, you're probably not getting a car. But when it comes to audio gear, we know how to make this stuff. A lot of the prices are just prices. So anyway, let's go check this out.
Boys and girls, today I want to talk about DI boxes, the instrument input on your interface, because DI boxes matter. They're actually much more important than most people think. We're all recording DI signals these days, right? And those devices will color your sound. They will be a part of your guitar tone. And believe me, they all sound different. So in this video, I'm going to try...
Really? Okay. Now I got a problem. Believe me is never a good one. They all sound different. One of the things we talk about all the time is that just because you can measure a difference doesn't mean they sound different. But many times, you can find a whole bunch of people that think things sound different, and yet when you actually double blind them and test them, they can't tell the difference which one is which. So I don't know. I'm hoping that, unlike everybody else who claims that things are so magical and do all this magical, mystical tour, whatever stuff, that's going to provide some actual graphs and evidence. I did see that he made a comparison video where I think he allows you to download some multi-tracks. So that's great, because at least you can test that stuff yourself. But I question this sort of thing. We'll see.
Try to explain what a DI box is, what it can do for you, and how you can find the right DI box for you. I'm even going to show you how you can heavily color and even distort your guitar tone with the help of a DI box. I'm going to show you all those different models here. That's going to be a lot of fun. Time to learn something about DI boxes. Here we go. So before showing you all those different models, I want to start with a theoretical part where I try to explain what a DI box is. So I'm going to talk about impedance, I'm going to talk about balanced signals and stuff like that. So if that sounds interesting to you, you better stay tuned. If that sounds boring.
So I don't really know that much about fuzz boxes and things like that. In general, in pro audio, the higher the impedance, the better. The less difficulty you're going to have with stuff down the line, the less it's going to hurt any split signal from it. Remember, a lot of times in the workflow is, even if you're recording a real guitar amp, I like to split at the DI so that you have a signal that you can actually see very well for editing and everything else, or you could change later on if you needed to. So I always want to take a DI split before the guitar gets to the distortion generating stuff, or at least to the amp. Hopefully before the distortion generating stuff. I've done several videos on this. If you guys want to see a much more in-depth, I could show you. Oops, I bought the wrong pick. I went to go buy some picks today at the hardware store, and I think they're saying I bought the wrong one. Oops. But you know what? We'll make it work. Yeah, now I'm thinking I really screwed up. Oops. Well, that's okay. You can always buy more picks. Right, so never mind. So I like to split, and so the higher the impedance, the easier it is to split, less noise, all that stuff. But let's go on to see what.
Or if you have some kind of TikTok attention span, you might want to use the chapters below to navigate to the practical part where you can hear the different models. But if you want to learn something, watch the entire video. So basically, we're using DI boxes to connect all kinds of signals to a microphone preamplifier, to the mic input of an outboard mic pre, or of your interface, or of a mixing console. And most of the time, those are weaker signals, unbalanced weaker signals coming from guitar or bass pickups. And a DI box is basically doing three things. First of all, it's converting our unbalanced guitar signal into a balanced signal. That's one thing. I'm going to explain that in a minute. It's going to take care of the levels, so the microphone preamp is happy. And most importantly, it's going to take care of the impedance, because we're connecting a high impedance guitar output to...
Sorry, I'm a little bit late.
Oh, that's okay.
Gonna go on through now.
Okay.
It's all right?
Yep.
So, and I'll also do the window and the register, right?
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Everybody's here who needs to be here. Okay, so let me go on.
A microphone input that is expecting a much lower impedance. And I'm going to explain those three things, but I want to focus on the impedance part, because I feel like that is, first of all, the most difficult one to understand, and also the most important one. But let's start with unbalanced versus balanced signals. So an unbalanced signal is a two-wire signal that consists of the signal itself and a ground. And if we have a balanced signal, you can see it here, 3 pins or 3 wires. The main difference is that it carries the signal twice, which makes it louder, but it's actually very smart, because at the beginning of the cable, one of those 2 signals gets polarity or phase inverted. And then at the end of the cable, it gets back to normal. That means any interference, any hum, any noise that the cable might pick up along the way will be fully canceled out. So that means
This is really good explanation of why we use balanced signals, okay? Great.
balanced signals will pick up way less noise, hum, interferences compared to unbalanced signals. And this is important if you have longer cable runs. If you're in your home studio and you connect your guitar straight to your interface, that's not important. You don't need a balanced signal here. But let's say you are sending the signal from one room to another. Guitarist in one room, in the live room, you are in the control room, you want to record the DI, or from the stage to the front of house, situations like that. So as soon as you have longer cable runs, you want them to be balanced. And this is where standalone dedicated DI boxes have an advantage compared to your interface with an instrument input. Because you cannot separate that from the interface, and the interface will be close to your computer, and you can't run a guitar cable, whatever, 30 meters into your live room. That's not going to work. So in those cases, if you have longer cable runs, you really want to invest into a standalone DI box. If you're just recording guitars and basses in your control room, you don't need that. You can use the instrument input on your interface, which, by the way, is a DI box and a mic pre in one box. So if you're using a high Z input on your interface, it's basically the same thing.
Now, I know we get into these pedantic arguments over whether or not an interface instrument input is a DI or not. I say it's a DI. I agree with Christian Kohle here.
So turning an unbalanced signal into a balanced signal will not actually change your guitar tone, but it will help you to get a cleaner signal, because all the noise that you might pick up will also be amplified later when we reamp the guitars. No matter if it's a real amp or an amp sim. If you're sending that noise into a high gain amp, it will be amplified. So it helps us to get a cleaner signal. Let's talk about the levels. So as I've said, from the DI box, we're going into a microphone preamp. And that means we want to make the mic pre happy, and the mic pre is expecting some kind of microphone level.
And some DIs have a line output. I'm thinking of the Waves GTR. I think there were a couple others.
And this here, a DI box, is not really an amplifier. This is just preparing our guitar signal to go into an amplifier, which is the mic pre, where we set the levels, where we bring the level from microphone level to line level and into our converters. Most DI boxes just have a pad. So all you do is you pad down the signal if it is too hot for your mic pre. And this happens very often with active DI boxes and active pick.
Now, lots of instrument interface, lots of interface instrument inputs don't have enough headroom, and they actually clip even if you put the pad in. Focusrite was famous for that. I think most of the 5-volt stuff, the USB stuff, is. It might just be a problem with the available voltage. I'm not sure.
Pickups. So this is not an active amplifier that's going to amplify your signal. No, most of the time it's actually the opposite. And then the microphone preamp will take care of amplifying the signal. Okay, but now let's talk about impedance. This is maybe the most difficult to understand part, but also the most interesting and maybe the most important part. And I'm going to try to explain it in the most catchy and understandable and idiot-proof way, from musician to musician. I'm going to try to make it as easy as possible. What you need to understand is this. Your guitar, your pickups have an output impedance, which, by the way, is pretty high. That's why it always says like high Z, on the inputs. A high output impedance. And the microphone amplifier is expecting a way lower impedance, the impedance of a microphone. So we need something in between to convert that. So everybody's happy. Because, and here's the interesting part, the output impedance of your pickups and the input impedance of any device you connect it to, doesn't matter what it is, they will have a reaction. They will actually interact. What you need to understand is that your pickups will sound different depending on the input impedance of the following device. So that means if you connect your guitar to whatever, device A, it will sound different compared to device B because your pickups will be loaded differently and will sound differently.
Yeah, this is when you hear about things loading down, like you go ahead, plug your guitar into a line input on a mixing console and see what it does. You might be tripped out that you might really miss the highs and lows, or it's going to do something. That's not necessarily true with some high impedance output active pickups though. And one of the things to really remember is the maximum power transfer theorem. That has you can do a lot with understanding what the impedance does by understanding that theorem. Same thing with like ohms. You know, how many ohms is my speaker cabinet that my amp's plugged into or whatever.
And here it gets important, right? Because what we want to achieve when we record a DI track that we're going to reamp later, we want the pickup to believe it is connected to a guitar amp, okay? And with the wrong impedance, the pickup's going to behave differently and it's going to sound differently. And I've been using a simple analogy with a car and a street, but I just found something even better to explain impedance to you. There's a link below, and this analogy comes from my dear friends at Audient. There's a link below if you want to read this. I'm going to explain this, but maybe you want to read this one more time. And they are not talking about a road and a car, they're talking about a train and a bridge. But let's combine this. Let's take my car and their bridge. So here's how it works. Imagine a bridge over a valley in between two mountains, okay? And then we've got your car and you want to pass that bridge. And the car stands for your guitar signal. And the higher the impedance, output impedance of your pickup, the heavier the car and the more demanding for the bridge. The bridge, on the other hand, is the input impedance of the following device. Let's say the DI box or the guitar amp or whatever, the mic pre, whatever it is. And the higher the input impedance, the more stable, the heavier that bridge will be. And the lower the input impedance, the more shaky and unstable it gets. That means if we lower the impedance, the input impedance of the following device, once you enter that bridge, it gets really shaky, especially if you have a heavy car, high output impedance. And if it gets shaky, you can't drive that fast. But if you have like a stable bridge, you can go much faster. And the tempo here is actually our signal, the level of our signal. So the higher the input impedance of the following device, the more stable the bridge, the faster we can drive. That means we have a stronger signal. And the weaker it gets, the weaker our signal gets. The level.
I'm not 1,000% sure I'm thrilled with the way this analogy, but if it works for you, that's awesome. I like analogies. I had a lot of trouble understanding voltage and current and stuff back in the day, and just had a lot of bad analogies. And later on, people were making better analogies, and I had a much easier time to understand them.
Actually drops. But there's even more. There's even more. So let's just imagine that shaky bridge. If it gets really shaky, what's going to happen is the loose parts on your car, they might fall off. Some screws, whatever, you know. And the looser parts in this example are the high frequencies especially, and the transients. Because that makes it more complicated. Impedance is not linear. It's very frequency dependent. But let's skip that for now. Oh, it is actually very interesting also with guitar power amps and the impedance curve of the cabinet that you connect. That really determines how a tube amp sounds. And it actually makes a tube amp behave like a tube amp and sound like a tube amp. But that's a different story. So back to our bridge. So what I'm saying is the lower the input impedance of the follow-up device, the weaker your signal and the darker your signals. It will roll off the highs. It will get darker and darker. The transient response will be slower. Is that necessarily something bad? Not really. But if you want to have a signal that is as true as possible to the actual sound of your pickups, it means we want to have a very, very stable bridge. That means we want to have the highest input impedance possible. And it doesn't really matter if you connect a guitar to a DI box or if you connect a microphone to a mic input. What you want is a certain, let's say, relation between the impedance. So, for example, with microphones, if we take a typical dynamic microphone with a impedance of 200 ohm, then they say the input impedance of the mic pre should be 5 to 10 times higher in order to make the microphone perform well. So that means if the microphone has 200 ohms output impedance, we want to have at least 1 kilo ohm or better 2 kilo ohm input impedance on the preamp.
Again, they make these variable impedance mic pre's, right? So mileage may vary.
At least if we want to have a strong signal, the most natural transients, and full highs. Of course, this can be used creatively. There are some audience preamps, for example, where you can switch the impedance to something much lower, and that will color the sound of certain microphones, especially dynamic mics and ribbon mics. And it's the same with passive pickups. So if you lower the impedance, things will get darker and sound different. This can be used creatively, but again, what we are doing here is we're trying to get the cleanest signal possible into our DAW. So that means, once again, make sure the impedance is high. And that's why the input impedance of all those DI boxes is very high, sometimes even mega ohm, because that is the input impedance of a typical guitar amp. And that is what a pickup is used to. Especially, by the way, passive pickups. They react to this like a lot more sensitive. Then the output impedance is much lower, something like 200 or 300 ohms, typical microphone impedance. Why? Because we're connecting it to a mic pre, and that makes the mic pre happy. And here comes our first audio example, and this proves how important it is to use an instrument preamplifier, to use a high Z input, to use a DI box, and not to plug your guitar into the line input of your whatever interface or console. So what you're gonna hear now is the difference between plugging the guitar into an instrument in and a line in. Have a listen.
Let's just check something real quick. I'm looking for radial DI's input impedance, because I think that, I'm not sure about radial, but for a lot of DI boxes, the input impedance is a lot lower than people expect, which is why they say, oh, it's such a warmer sound with this DI compared to this instrument interface, or interface instrument input. Because a lot of these interfaces, like you just showed, 1.5 mega ohms. Let's see, here's the radial JDI specs. So this is using the Jensen DI that we used way back in the day for like every direct box for passive stuff in the studio. Input impedance is 140 kilo ohms, okay? It's probably way more than enough. What's the impedance? Seymour Duncan. Let's look at some pickup that everybody uses. Not a blackout, but just some kind of regular pickup comparison chart. So okay, some of these are like hardcore, like the Nazgul and stuff. Those are like massive, right? Do they have impedance here? DC resistance, it's not exactly gonna be the same as impedance, but you can use it as a guide. Yeah, see how they put not applicable for the actives. Let me just see if we can't find. Just give me some specs. Because that's really pickup ID impedance. Okay, let's see if somebody has. Okay, so a jazz neck pickup, 7 kilo ohms. So 10 times that would be 70. So 70K. That's half of the input impedance for the JDI. So maybe that's okay. But just to let you know, I have a feeling that the instrument input is going to be more accurate than most of these passive DIs.
And wow, what a big difference, right? It gets so much darker. And this was exactly what I was describing. So the line input is a very, very...
So it's just funny, when the guys are all the cork sniffers out there, you know, when they're talking about how much better these things are, they're really talking about a signal that's been drastically altered compared to the actual thing.
shaky bridge. So we lose a lot of highs, and you really don't want that. It's so extreme. You can also hear this through an amp.
But again, you might prefer that second one. You really might. I wouldn't be surprised at all.
So this is the influence that a mismatch of impedance can have to your signal. You really don't want that. So first thing we've learned is never plug your guitar into a line input, because the line input, the impedance of the line input is way too low. But you know what? It's going to get more complex.
Of course, never say never, yada, 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 but no, that's right.
Even, I'm sorry, because we're going to connect any DI box to a mic pre, and here the impedance needs to be matched one more time. Let me just look at the numbers. So this one, this Telefunken Active DI, has an input impedance here of 30 kilo ohm and an output impedance of 250 ohm.
I don't think that's enough. I know it says Telefunken on it, so it must be the best thing in the whole world, but 30K is not that much.
Like a dynamic microphone, 250 ohm. So in order to get a clean signal, now we need a mic pre that has an input impedance that is high enough again. And you know what? When I started doing this video, I made a mistake. I was actually using my Warm Audio 412 something preamp that I really like. It's a great sounding preamp. It's their take on an API preamp. I use it a lot, but I think it only has an input impedance of 600 ohm or something. So I was using that, and I could hear the differences between the DI boxes, but only when I plugged in the DI boxes into some preamps with a high input impedance, modern sounding preamps, the differences got so much more obvious. And here are two examples. So right now in this video, we're using this Cranbourne Camden preamp, which I think has an input impedance, I forgot, but something like 3 kilo, high enough. Another very good example, because this one isn't exactly cheap, are pretty much all the Audient preamps. I could really recommend them here because they all have, some of them are switchable, but they all have a really high impedance. Any of the Audient preamps, the Evo preamps and the ID preamps, or this Cranbourne Camden preamp as well. And there are others as well, but always check the input impedance. You don't want to use any vintage sounding preamps here with an input impedance at a few hundred ohms or something, okay?
And that was the bass chain, right, over at Vintage, was JDI into a Neve Kelso. I think that was a very low impedance preamp, if I'm right. I wonder if somebody would have the specs on it. Let's see. That was a Class AB, I think. That's Kelso preamp. Oh, somebody's selling one for 20 grand. God, this looks just like ours, actually. Wonder if it is. That would be nuts. Yeah, I don't see the impedance. So sorry. Never mind.
Differences are quite big. But of course, it's not only the impedance. Each of those DI boxes has one or several transformers, and they also color the sound.
Yeah, but by how much? This is what we found: is the transformers didn't really do much in the passband. I know they're meant to distort and do some other things, but it was so subtle. I would be surprised if people could actually hear that in a double-blind ABX test.
Then we have passive and active DI boxes. We'll talk about that. So it's not only the impedance. And we will see that numbers are not everything when we test those different DI boxes.
I know people say numbers aren't everything. I don't agree. Like if you know what numbers you're looking for, the numbers are everything. It's just that sometimes we're not exactly sure which numbers we need to look at.
Now let's quickly talk about active versus passive. Yes. Both pickups and DI boxes. We got a passive DI box from Atelier der Tonkunst here and two active ones, one from Telefunken and one called Dark Storm from Lightning Boy Audio. The advantage of a passive DI box is that it doesn't need any power. That's cool. You can also use it for reamping, so you can use it like in both directions. And so
Whoa. Not necessarily. Some devices, yes.
it's easy to use, more or less. But it's known to color the sound a little more, especially if you have passive pickups. This one sounds great, though. I gotta
Maybe. You'd have to prove that. I actually didn't find that when I tested.
say that. Great sounding DI box, passive one.
Again, let's go to one of these. Did I do one where we showed a bunch? Let's see. You know, it's funny. The really expensive Yuri, like Universal Audio or whatever, was the crappiest, but it wasn't super bad. The Rapco and the Radial, those are both passives. Let me see. I think the Yuri was an active. What do I have that was active? So Behringer XR18 with the passive pickup, pretty flat. I mean, although, you know, even up here where it rolls off, it's not even, it's like 1.5 decibels at the most. That's nothing. So that's an active. Countryman is active. Okay, but see this active one? So he says the passive colors of sound. I'm seeing the I'm seeing the active color of the sound. Countryman is the one everybody always talks about, right? But it's not as flat as some of the cheaper ones or the Radial JDI. Okay, here's and so this is my old what I wrote. Focusrite 18920 Gen 2. Interface DIs are terrible, right? Right? Well, this one is for all the intents and purposes ruler flat. Has noise and distortion specs which should be inaudible in any real world use. There may be better DIs, but trying to blame your lack of hits on this particular DI would be time better spent on self-reflection. So here's active, passive, and single coil on the Radial 18i20. It's ruler flat within 0.2 dBs, okay? And let's go. So Octapre Mark II is going to be very similar. IK Multimedia's HD, iRig HD was actually kind of weird. So here's the Radial. So you compare the Radial to the Focusrite. The Radial's, it is more colored, but more is so relative. It's barely 0.1 dB deviation. What else did I have? So here's the Rapco. This is the El Cheapo. Pretty much matching the Radial here. So the colors, it's not really colored. I know that's what you're supposed to say, but I don't know. And again, these impedances, I don't have the actual specs on the impedance. So that could actually change the way some of these things are acting. But if you notice, okay, actually, let me walk that back a little bit, because here is showing an active pickup, a passive humbucker, and a single coil, and they're all pretty much the same. The line is on top of each other. So I don't know, man. I think the impedance is high enough.
Active DI boxes usually also have a higher level. Something like, I don't know, 15, 20 dB higher usually. So depending on your source, you got to choose the right one. And what people say is actually right, that if you play passive pickups, you better go for an active DI.
I think this is wrong. I think the numbers show this is actually wrong. I know this is the advice. Passive pickups go to an active DI. Active pickups, you can use a passive okay. I think that's wrong. I think either one works fine, and we make too much of a big deal about this thing. There's other factors to worry about, like I say, environmental noise. That may be better in some designs than others.
Usually, because it's going to color your sound less. A passive DI is going to darken it slightly, and it might also take away some of the low end. So an active DI is going to perform better with your passive pickups. Or let's say the other way, your passive pickups going to perform better with an active DI. And usually passive pickups need more level, so this works. That makes, okay, so there we go.
that might be a difference. It doesn't seem to actually be much difference in practice for me, but maybe the active DI can put out more signal, which you may need for your passive signal to get into your recording interface. I don't know, because I have a feeling that the noise is going to be pretty much the same either way, and the active is just going to make it louder, even though the signal is going to be louder. But I think it's a wash. I guess we could test this, but I don't think this advice is backed up by evidence. Let's see if you provide some.
Pickups like my EMGs, they don't really care. They work great with a passive DI, and passive DIs are usually also cheaper, you know. And if I use my EMGs with this one, I need to use a pad all the time.
Yeah, see, and the pad has a chance of actually coloring your sound. I did some tests on this. I'm not sure if I published them. I got to go check. But there are pad circuits that do mess with your sound quite a bit. So the louder pickups, and EMGs aren't necessarily that much louder than other pickups, and a lot of these interface instrument pickup inputs can't handle the level of even your EMGs.
But in the end, yeah, it depends on the pickups you play, but it also depends on the sound that you want.
I don't think it's, well, unless you want to take the highs out of your sound, I just don't think it matters. I think the tests bear that out. So unless you're going to provide some evidence to the contrary, let's see.
And finally, here comes the practical part. Today, I want to compare 3 different models, and I chose those 3 high quality, high-end models because I think they give you a pretty good overview of how DI boxes can sound and what they can do.
I don't think is it, he said that the Telefunken was 30K input impedance. Let me check that. Telefunken DI impedance. I don't think that's high enough. CTD. Oh, this is the wrong one. Jeez, $400. What is the passive one? Okay, 245 bucks for this DI, where I'm pretty sure that the $40 DI is gonna do well. Oh no, 100 kilo ohms input impedance. That's not bad. Okay, let's see. Oh, geez, 245 bucks. I know it says Telefunken on it. Let's see if it has some other features that make this better. Ground lift, and 15 dB pad. Yeah, I don't know. I'd probably just buy the $40 one.
So, like I already introduced, we got this passive model from Atelier der Tonkunst, their high-res DI, which is very, very popular over here in Germany. Passive DI sounds great. Like they make their own.
Hang on, he says sounds great. What do you mean sounds great? I don't like that kind of talk unless you're really providing some evidence. Where's the? You said the links would be here. I don't see it. DI boxes. Okay, here we go. Dark Storm. Wait, that's not. Hold on. ADT. Oh, okay, that is ADT. Okay. There's the specs. Get it in English? It'll be good if this is like low impedance, because then we can yeah, look. Oh, okay. So in minus 30 is 33 kilo ohms and 0. So is that's the pad? It has less impedance. I would think that's gonna suck out some high end there, but 220K. This is fine. Okay, let's go back here.
Their own transformers, and many people love them. Passive design, and I've been using it for years, especially with my active pickups, with my EMG pickups. Then we have This one here. This is the active DI box from Telefunken,
Oh, exactly.
USA.
Yes, $400.
I'm not going to say Telefunken, and you shouldn't say Telefunken either. So it's Telefunken, USA, and this is a great sounding DI box too. So the first time I tested it, I was like, wow, this sounds
Again, great sounding DI. What do you mean great sounding?
so full and complete or something. It's really, really big and warm and nice sound.
I don't want to insult this guy, but do you guys believe that he would be able to ABX test this versus a Focusrite instrument impedance? I don't know. I have my doubts.
I liked it, and it's using, I think, a British transformer from Kohle. Aren't they also doing the transformers for Neve, for the classic Neve designs? Great sounding, active design. And then we've got something special down here. This is a company from New York called Lightning Boy Audio, and this is actually a mic pre, but in combination with a JFET instrument preamplifier. I think I'm gonna do a dedicated video about this because this is such an interesting device, especially the mic pre has some cool features, some cool features to color your sound. It even has a guitar out, so you can go with your instrument into the preamp and then go into your amp or stomp boxes. Or
is that really what it does, or does it split? I would rather it just split, but because a lot of these things don't split when you put the instrument in, or when you use the instrument input. But who knows? We'll see.
With the mic and then into your amp. It's cool. But the funny part is that this one can go from very clean, that's what they say, to colored or even highly distorted, which is of course more fun. Okay, time to test those three boxes. Here we go. All right, so here we are in Cubase, and I've already recorded this.
Again, I know we have Cubase fans, but guys, I don't know why you're using this stuff anymore. The routing is just not there. I mean, it's been 20 years. You guys come up with some better routing on this thing already.
Same twangy chord, like a little percussive chicka 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 kind of thing through all those different boxes. Actually through those three you see here, and also through the instrument input of the Cranbourne Camden preamp. And I gotta say the results are quite interesting. All the DIs were going through the Camden mic input, except for the Dark Storm, which has an inbuilt preamp, so that was going into the line input.
Okay, so you're changing the number of amplifiers right off the bat. We don't know the impedance of if the impedance is right for the output of these DI boxes. So if they do sound different, we already have some reasons why, but okay.
And
You
these
just run that thing into the other amp anyway.
are all different takes. That's why I only recorded one chord to make them sound as similar as possible and to really hear the differences between the DI boxes.
So you didn't reamp into, okay. So it's different playing each time. Like this is, I mean, I know this is okay, but it's not ideal at all. I mean, if you're gonna play different performances and then try and judge the difference between different equipment, should have reamped them. All right.
When I started this, the first thing I tried to do was to use the through output that every DI box usually has, but it quickly turned out if you use that, it changes the tone. It changes the level, that's one thing, that's not a problem, but it changes the tone depending on the input impedance of wherever you go. So I decided to just connect each DI box separately and record a single take, a separate take.
And that's one thing you're gonna run into when you're doing a DI with the guitar amp. That through the split is going to still whatever impedance effects that next device has, never mind like, you know, ground loops and stuff like that, it is going to affect your DI tone. That's why, you know, I know it's blasphemy, but I just like recording straight DI into the interface input and be done with it.
Take for each DI box. All right. They're all level matched, and I want to start with this one, with the active Telefunken DI box, because this one has impressed me quite a bit. Let's have a listen. And this is not only really full sounding, it also has this high-end shimmer. It almost sounds like a piezo pickup. Have a listen. It sounds really, really full.
Look, I can look at these signals right now and tell you that they're not the same. I mean, you can see them. I really think you should have reamped these.
Range, really nice. And you will hear the difference if I switch to any of the other ones. So let's just go to the Atelier der Tonkunst, to the ADT. I start with the Telefunken again.
Yeah, much darker, right?
And what a difference. That sounds like switching your pickup, right? It gets a lot darker. Remember, this is a passive DI. It gets a lot darker.
Again, we don't know what caused that, though. Is that really just the different devices, or is this the different methodologies used here to capture these? It is, that is kind of stark. That's interesting. Let me go back to the Telefunken.
And this is not only really full sounding. Remember, and the passive DI, like the Telefunken, it sounds like switching. And what a difference. That sounds like switch. If I switch to any of the other ones. So let's just go to the Atelier der Tonkunst, to the ADT. I start with the Telefunken again.
You know, the proper thing to do is just run a sweep tone through there or some white noise or something. And just look at it on a graph, see what the difference is. There's so many variables we're messing with at the same time here. It's really hard to tell. That's just quieter. That's definitely quieter. And you can see it on the waveforms.
And what a difference. That sounds like switching your pickup, right? It gets a lot darker. Remember, this is a passive DI. It gets a lot darker, so that high-end shimmer is suddenly gone. Also, like the Telefunken seems to be a little faster. I don't know. On the other hand, the ADT has some kind of twangy upper mid bite. Let's start with the Telefunken again.
This really isn't what I found when I tested one variable at a time. Alright, so I'm tired of the listening test. I'm sorry. Let's see if you provide some graphs, because I know this has been a long video already, and I don't want to.
Overall, I don't know. The ADT sounds more like an electric guitar, and through the Telefunken, it sounds more like an acoustic guitar recorded through a piezo. Not in the free.
All right, let's see.
Upper mid range. More.
Let's see some graphs or something.
Aggressive, a little more off. Now I've got one thing. Here's some distortion already. Tonal options. The more you boost it, it seems, the darker and fuller it gets. Next thing I want to do is I want to turn on a guitar amp or a full guitar rig. And what I'm going to use here is a great plugin for my friend.
Lots of times you wonder, is that really going to make a difference to where that matters? So, mailman just came. Hold on one second. Thank you. We have an awesome mailman here. Our regular mailman. You know, you always hear that legends about the British Postal Service. This guy would fit right in there. He is awesome.
Friends at Bogren Digital.
But yeah, if this is going to make a big difference to the amp, you know, you're almost like watching Glenn's pickup video, right? Like if you match the gains, when you're playing high gain stuff, it really wasn't making that much difference with the pickups. But
it's their amp knob Rev C, Jens Bogren's take on a rectifier. And I use that plugin a lot, like for all my quick and dirty stuff and playing. It just sounds great. And we're going to use it here as well. The gain is all the way down, so we don't need high gain here. We want to hear especially the transients as good as possible. So let's start with Telefunken. And that's the Darkstorm, clean setting. Wow.
Volume.
So this almost sounds like adding a tube screamer. like I said, in your face, and the Telefunken is a lot more reserved, a lot warmer. Now, which is what's interesting is that the extended highs of the Telefunken are, I can't hear them anymore. I think they're just like rolled off by the speaker,
like what Glenn
the
found
guitar speaker anyway. But what I can hear is like the twanginess. So now the Darkstorm
bass
sounds actually brighter than the Telefunken.
I don't think he's going to provide any like real apples to apples measurement here. It seems like I'm going to talk about bass guitar. Might be so
Very nice. Not as thick as the Telefunken. Yeah, the ADT and the Darkstorm sound pretty close to each other, and this supports my theory that the Telefunken is actually the most colored one of the bunch. It just makes things sound rounder, makes things sound warmer. And now it depends on what you want to record. If you want to record a clanky...
broken, you got to test these things. Like, you actually got to run a sweep through here and find out, because I think that the Telefunken might just be an inferior DI if this is what's happening, honestly. I mean, you might want that sound, but I wouldn't. I found that the $40 ones were great, and I'll stick with those. You know, I have the Radial JDI, so I'm a little bit spoiled. So I do have them plugged in here, just some sort of paranoia or whatever. And like I say, a lot of times what matters is how you feel about it, because if you feel good, you're gonna make more confident decisions, you know. But anyway, I think this has been way more than enough. I'll see